and just click on OK, and that should go away. So good morning. This is the workshop for the Essential Clerk of Session, and I am Dan Williams, as you probably know. And what we're going to do is do the usual sort of share who we are type thing, assuming I can advance my screen now. Okay, so here's what I want you to share: name, church, how long you've been a ruling elder, how long you've been a clerk, and I'll go first so you can have a little bit more time. Again, my name is Dan Williams. I'm the executive presbyter and stated clerk of Central Florida Presbytery. Never been a ruling elder, but I'm in my 41st year of being a minister. And I've been a presbytery clerk for 21 of those 41 years. So I'm about to start my 22nd year. So I'm going to go to Emily, I think. And Emily, if you would share your information.
I'm just outside of Mount Dora, Florida, and I'm at the First Presbyterian Church in Mount Dora, and I've been a ruling elder. Well, this is my sixth year, and I served on committees until this year, and we haven't had an elder for almost a year, and I finally decided I would become a clerk. And so I've done 2 meetings, and I'm not sure I'm doing it right, so I need to be here.
Well, we'll see if we can help you a bit with that. Carrie?
I am with Merritt Island Presbyterian Church, and I'm Carrie Feldheim. In case you see the spelling, you just pretend there's no J, you're okay. Feldheim. And I have just started my 4th term, not consecutively. So I've served 3 different terms as ruling elder. This is the first year, my first 2 months in this term. And I think it's probably been maybe about 5 years since I was an elder before. And I have been clerk for 1 month. So I need this.
And Stacy.
Good morning. I'm here in Orlando, Florida with Washington Shores Presbyterian Church. This is my 3rd term. This is the 3rd time I've been a ruling elder. Well, I don't know if they call it standing ruling elder, but it actually on session right now. Mm-hmm. And this will be my, I think, 2nd time being a clerk. And so I'm definitely here for the refresher, because I haven't been on session now in, I don't know, it's been maybe about 5 years. No, it hasn't been that long. It can't be that long. But I haven't been on session in a couple of years.
Right.
And but I've been a ruling elder, I think, maybe close to 10 years, I think, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so all of you have been on sessions for a while. You've been serving as ruling elders, but sounds like all of you are relatively new to the whole clerk area of responsibility. And this workshop is primarily designed for you folks, people who are just starting to be clerks of session, although anybody can be part of this and benefit from it. Let me just say from this point, as we move through the workshop, if you ever have any questions, please ask them right away. And I'll do my best to answer those. All right, so you're probably familiar with the Book of Order. I have the current Book of Order cover on this slide, and it says 2019 through 2021. It's actually 2019 through 2023 at this point, because when the General Assembly met in 2020, it met as a completely virtual event. And one of the decisions that was made coming into that meeting was they would not entertain any amendments to the Book of Order. So there were no amendments referred to the presbyteries to vote on through 2021. And that meant the Book of Order just continues in its current format. The General Assembly will meet again this coming June and July, and very likely we'll have some amendments to the Book of Order. So we'll vote on those as a presbytery between July of 2022 and June of 2023. And any ones that pass a majority of the presbyteries will become part of the new Book of Order. But this is from chapter 3, which chapter 3 of the form of government, that's what the G letter stands for. This chapter is about the 4 councils of the church, the session, the presbytery, the synod, and the General Assembly. And the very first section, the 0.01 section, has general principles for all councils. And as it says here, each council shall elect a clerk who shall record the transactions of the council, keep its rolls of membership and attendance, maintaining any required registers, preserve its records, and furnish extracts from them when required by another council of the church. So you've got in that paragraph basic beginnings of a position description of the tasks that the Clerk of Session will undertake. And I'll have a way of summarizing that momentarily. It's necessary that the Clerk of Session be a ruling elder elected by the session for such term as it may determine. There is the possibility that the Clerk of Session is a ruling elder not currently serving as a voting member of the session. That can happen. When that does happen, the Clerk of Session is given voice but not vote during the meetings. My very first session that I was moderator of, the Clerk of Session there had been clerk for 30 consecutive years. So whenever he was not serving as a voting member of the session, he was still present and taking its minutes. And when he passed away, unfortunately, that created a little bit of a crisis for the church, because no one else had ever done that work for 3 decades. And somebody had to step forward and take that on. All right, so I like to boil down the work of the clerk into 3 main tasks. The first task is record keeping. As clerk, you're keeping track of minutes. You heard that last paragraph talk about registers and roles, like the roll of active members, the roll of baptized members, and so forth, the baptisms that are performed, the weddings that have taken place, and so forth. These are all part of the registers that are required to be kept by each session. And the Clerk of Session is responsible for making sure that these things happen. In a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about each of these things, particularly about taking minutes, since that's usually one of the primary tasks that most clerks do most frequently. The second area has to do with the smooth functioning of meetings, helping the moderator prepare the agenda, or the docket as it's oftentimes called, helping the moderator with matters of procedure. Where are we in the item on the floor? What's the motion that's on the floor? Have we had any amendments or other subsidiary motions? That's part of the clerk's responsibility, is to help the moderator stay on track as far as the conduct of the meeting, but also in preparing for the meeting to make sure that all of the business that needs to be handled at that meeting is on the agenda, and any paperwork, any reports are in the hands of the people, at least if they're written reports, have been distributed to the members of the session. And then the third area of tasks is in the area of communications. The Clerk of Session is one of the primary channels of communication between other councils of the church, the Presbytery, the Synod, the General Assembly. More times than not, those communications are going to be coming from the Presbytery, but sometimes they'll come from the Synod and the General Assembly. And invariably, those communications will come both to the moderator / pastor and also to the Clerk of Session. So whenever those communications come in, the clerk of session needs to make sure that they've gotten to the right person. Maybe it's a communication that needs to be referred to the worship committee or equivalent, or maybe it's something that needs to be brought to the attention of the pastor. Whatever it is, the clerk of session is helping make sure that those communications get to where they need to go. And sometimes the clerk is handling communications going the other direction, making requests or communicating information to the presbytery and so forth. The clerk oftentimes either does that or participates with the pastor in making sure those things are done. So 3 main tasks: records, meetings, communications. All right, now there's something that I call the prime directive. This isn't written down anywhere, and it's kind of something that the way I express it. But as a clerk of session, as a clerk of any council, your main responsibility is to make the moderator look good. What I mean by that, it's tongue in cheek, yes, but you're making sure that the meeting is flowing properly, that we're staying on track, that the moderator is not making any procedural errors. Whenever we do presbytery meetings, when we had face-to-face meetings, I would always sit off to the side of the moderator so that we could easily confer when we needed to. When we do these virtual meetings, both the moderator and I are in the presbytery office in our conference room, and we sit across the table from each other and can mute the microphone. And when he needs to, the moderator will confer with me as to what's coming up or what's the best way to handle the matter that's on the floor. So I'm always trying to make sure the moderator knows what's coming up next. Now, presbytery meetings are a lot more complex than a session meeting is. And what we do, this may or may not be apparent if you've ever been to one of our presbytery meetings, but we actually create a script that's in a notebook, and the moderator is following the script. We script out everything that's supposed to happen in a presbytery meeting, and I try to presuppose anything that might come up from the floor and tell the moderator what to do if something like that happens. We have a meeting with the moderator and myself and Christina Greenewalt, the assistant clerk. We meet with the moderator somewhere 3 to 5 days before the presbytery meeting to go over the script and the flow of business and to cover any possibilities of what might come up on the floor. You're not going to be doing that at the session level, but you're still, as clerk, following what's happening so that you can assist the moderator, like perhaps reminding the moderator that there's a motion on the floor that needs to be voted on. Sometimes when I'm moderating a session meeting, I do that quite frequently. I'll sometimes lose track of where we are with the pending matter. And I'm depending on the clerk at that point to keep me on track as to whether we voted or any other matter like that. So I throw that under the tongue-in-cheek rubric of making the moderator look good. If the moderator looks good, it means that everything is going according to order and according to the way that we hope things will happen. Not that we're trying to predetermine what the outcomes of votes are going to be. We're just making sure that the process is in place to make sure that the presbytery or the session can make the best decision that it can. Okay, moving on. Mentioned minutes, okay, and G 3.0107 says each council shall keep a full and accurate record of its proceedings. Minutes and all other official records are the property in perpetuity of said councils or their legal successors. Unfortunately, we've had to close some congregations over the years. We're currently doing that with the Homedale Presbyterian Church. When we do this, all of the minutes, all of the registers and rolls that are in the record book, financial records, and anything else that's in the church office is something that the presbytery goes through and inventories. Usually Christina and I are working with the administrative commission that's overseeing the process. and we inventory everything, and everything that needs to be retained, we bring to the Presbytery office and store it. Just a couple of weeks ago, Christina went on a trip with her husband to New Jersey, and they loaded 21 boxes of records into their vehicle and stopped at the Department of History in Philadelphia and transferred those records there, where they're maintained in the Department of History's vault. They have a very large vault where they keep records. It's actually a room, but the room is specially constructed and can be sealed. And they keep all the records from churches, presbyteries, synods, and so forth that they those groups want to have preserved. They keep on record there. It's like the Library of Congress for the Presbyterian Church. And I'll be saying a little bit more about the Department of History a little bit later in our time today. But keeping minutes, again, is going to be probably the most frequent thing and the most important thing that you'll be doing on a regular basis as a clerk of session. So minutes, once upon a time, they were handwritten, and they still can be handwritten and kept in a book that looks a lot like the picture that you're seeing here. One of the things to always keep in mind is that the minutes are a record of what the session did, not necessarily what was said. All right, so you don't have to jot down everything that's being said about an issue. If a committee is reporting, you maybe make note of the things that they've reported about, but if they make a recommendation, you record the recommendation and you record what the vote of the session was, and that would be sufficient. Now, whenever you're doing things like keeping minutes, there's always a bit of a tension between what is required to be in the minutes and what you need to have in the minutes. Okay, again, the minutes are a record of what the session did, but they're also a historical document. And sometimes you have to go a little bit beyond this basic rule of thumb that you're only recording the actions that the session took, in order to summarize a little bit of what the issue is, so that further down the road, maybe 10, 15 years later, you're able to have a sense of what actually was going on when the session handled a certain issue. So at times you have to use your good old common sense as to whether to enter some additional information in the minutes. And sometimes it's possible that somebody on the session might make a motion and the session pass it to instruct the clerk to summarize the discussion and spread that summary on the minutes, which you will do. And at the next meeting, when they review the minutes, if the session doesn't like your summary, they can always suggest changes to it. But more times than not, you're basically going to be recording the actions that have been taken and not necessarily everything else that has happened. When you have the minutes all said and done and they're entered into the permanent record book, those minutes have to be signed by the clerk. In some circumstances, sessions have been having the moderator sign the minutes as well. That was the way things were done in the former Presbyterian Church US, or sometimes it's referred to as the Southern Presbyterian Church, prior to reunion in 1983. But ever since then, that has not been specifically required by the Book of Order. The only signature required by the Book of Order is that of the clerk of the body, in the case of the session, the clerk of session. If you want to continue to have the moderator sign the minutes, that's fine. That's up to you, and you can do that. There's again, no specific requirement, but there's nothing that prevents you from doing that if the body wants it to be that way. You just can run into some issues if you don't have an installed pastor. There have been times when I have moderated session meetings at the time that a pastor has left before they've gotten some form of interim ministry. And in those churches that want the moderator to sign the minutes, I'm sometimes getting something in the mail from the church with minutes to sign and send back to them. So it just makes it a little bit more of a challenge. And if you go to the rubric of just having the clerk sign them, you don't run into that issue. One of the things about preserving the minutes, they should be printed on acid-free paper. Most good paper that you get in a store like Staples or Office Depot are going to be acid-free or close to being acid-free. But acid-free prolongs the length or lifetime of the written page. Now, you notice it says here that the minutes cannot be kept in a digital fashion. Probably most of us use a computer to write our minutes. And we have files that we've saved of those minutes. When I do Presbytery minutes, we do a digest of the flow of the meeting, which usually is somewhere between 10 to 14 pages long. And then we do an appendix of the attendance, which is about 4 or 5 pages. And then we attach all of the reports that were sent out with the meeting, the packet, the addendum, and so forth. So then when it's all said and done, my meeting minutes for a Presbytery meeting can be somewhere between 80 and 100 pages long. Again, thankfully for you, session meetings aren't going to be that lengthy. We print them out of the computer onto the appropriate paper, and we send them actually to a company to bind them in a book. And we do this every year. Our synod expects a bound copy of the minutes to be deposited with them. So we're usually making 3 books, 2 that we keep in the office and 1 that we give to the synod. There's a reason why they can't be digital. There has to be a printed out actual record. And that's because technology can change. And the program that you're using now may eventually go out of common use for some other program. As an aside, personally, I keep hoping this happens with Microsoft Word, because I started keeping minutes back in the late 80s using a computer using Word Perfect. And I never have been able to make Microsoft Word keep minutes as accurately as Word Perfect did. Whenever I'm reading a document into my final minutes in Word, it just decides it's going to change the font and it's going to change the indenting. And if a list starts with number 1, because the last list ended with number 4, the Word decides that this list is going to start with number 5. And I have to go back through and change the font and change the indenting and renumber everything so that it's correct. I never had that issue with Word Perfect. And the thing that I was struggling with this week was getting Word to put something into columns on a page that didn't cause everything that had been done before to also go into columns. And I had a little bit trouble getting that to happen. And basically the only way I could make it happen was to start my columns on a separate page. So I wasted about a half a page of blank space in order to get that done. But anyway, they can't be digital. A couple of years back, we had a pastor who had served one of our congregations for 32 years. And when he was leaving, he was negotiating with the session for the session to sell him his office computer, which the office computer was like 10 years old or so at that point in time. And I asked him, why are you wanting to buy such an old computer? Wouldn't it make more sense to just add some dollars to it and get something more modern? He said he didn't need it so much for the computer. He needed it for one of the programs that was on that computer that he wrote all of his sermons on. And that program was no longer made, and they could not find the discs of the program at the church. So the only working copy of the program he had was on that computer. And if he didn't have that, he would lose access to all the however many years, probably at least 20 years of sermons that he had written using that program and that computer. So I said to him, what you're going to want to do as soon as you do that is to make a backup copy of every one of those sermons. And hopefully you can do that by translating it, either maybe saving it as an Adobe Acrobat file, or if it'll transfer into Word or something like that. But you don't want to be in a situation where the technology changes, you no longer have the program, and all of that work that you did and saved in that format is no longer accessible. So that's the reason why to this day you still have to put minutes and the register, the rolls and registers, they all have to be printed on paper and kept in a book. There is a book that you can get from places like Cokesbury and probably the Presbyterian store, the online one the General Assembly has. And they will sell you, it's a post binder. Usually it has 3 posts in it, and there's a lever on the cover that you flip up and slide out, which enables the top cover to come off, and you can either add or take out papers. These usually go for at least $150. They're quite expensive, in part because they have a high quality acid-free paper in them. That's one option you have, but another option is to get some good paper from the stationery store and print everything out. And when you have a sufficient amount of pages printed out, taking them someplace and getting them bound. That's probably the easiest way and least expensive way to maintain your minutes. So I've talked about that. It used to be that you could put them in a 3-ring notebook, but recently the standards for keeping minutes changed and said that's not a good idea. And I know the reason for that is that on a standard 3-ring notebook, a page can get torn at the page holes, and the page can eventually fall out and get lost. So they don't want that happening. Questions about minutes? In the handouts, I think you all got the handouts that I usually provide with these meetings. There is a handout called Taking Minutes. It's a 2-page handout. It's something that I developed back in the late 80s, actually, the first version of this, when I was doing clerk workshops like this in Huntington Presbytery in central Pennsylvania. I shared it with a friend of mine who at the time was stated clerk of the Presbytery of West Virginia. And unbeknownst to me, he shared it with the General Assembly, and it got printed in a book that they used to provide called the Companion to the Constitution. It was printed as an appendix, something like Appendix S or something like that. I remember buying that book and looking at this appendix and saying, oh, this will be interesting. And I started reading down through it, and it said, goodness, this sounds so familiar. And I got to the end and it said it was provided by this other clerk, John Goodman was his name, based on a document created by Daniel Williams, Presbytery of Huntington. So I said, that's why it sounds familiar. I at least changed my presbytery to Presbytery of Shenandoah, but I don't think they ever changed it to Central Florida Presbytery, because the book has not been, they used to update it like every other year, but they no longer update it, but the appendices are still helpful. And I've given you 3 or 4 of those appendices, at least 3 of them in the materials that I've shared. But that
I don't have the taking minutes one.
You don't have the taking minutes one. I'll make sure that you all get that.
Yeah.
So here's a few tips for, and that page that I was talking about, the paper about taking minutes, will kind of cover this, but you want to try to keep your minutes in a similar form, so that the items that you're entering into the minutes are going to be in the same location from meeting to meeting. Let me give you an example. Baptisms, where people come to the session wanting somebody to be baptized. Requests to approve a wedding. Membership changes, like members that have joined by transfer, members that have been dismissed by transfer to other congregations, members who have joined by affirmation of faith or reaffirmation of faith, members who are being removed from the active members role because of a death. Oftentimes these get reported in the clerk's report. And the clerk's report you usually have in the very front part of the meeting, so that if you ever need to go and verify an action that the session has taken regarding somebody's membership or a baptism that was approved, you don't have to look through the entire set of minutes. You just look in the clerk's report whenever it appears in the meeting till you find what you're looking for. So keeping them consistent and organized helps you with these searches. Easier to find the information later. All right, so the way that we do meeting minutes in presbytery settings is, we have committees that report, and most of the sessions I've seen, they'll start the meeting one of the first things they do after the opening devotion is they'll approve the previous minutes. Then they'll hear from the clerk and they'll hear from the pastor. And then they'll hear from the session committees. So they'll take reports from each of the session committees. Then they'll handle, oftentimes this gets listed as old business, and Robert's Rules of Order is technically unfinished business. It's business that has not been completed from a previous meeting and has been referred to a future meeting. Like maybe an item that was referred to a committee and was not reported back by that committee. I always track it as unfinished business so that the body doesn't forget that there's work that's in process where we need to report back at some point in time. And then we do new business if there is any, and a reminder when the next meeting is, and we're generally done. All right, so here we're back to the Book of Order here. The clerk of each council shall make recommendation to that body for the permanent safekeeping of the body's records with the Presbyterian Historical Society in a temperature and humidity controlled environment, or in a temperature and humidity controlled environment of a seminary of the Presbyterian Church USA. So you're usually in this area, you're talking about sending your records either to the Historical Society in Philadelphia or putting them on deposit with Columbia Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. My sense is it's probably better to do it with the Historical Society because this is what they do. This is one of the main things that they do. What I've done in the presbyteries that I've been part of in the past is when I complete a minutes book and enough time has passed by where I don't need to refer to those minutes as frequently, we will put them on file with the Office of History. In a previous presbytery, not Central Florida, but in Huntington, where I first was clerk, we took the additional step of having the Historical Society do a microfilm of the minutes, and they would send us a copy of the microfilm. So if I ever needed to refer to older minutes, I could go to the microfilm first instead of having to ask the Department of History to pull the book I needed and ship it back to me so that I could get what I needed and then ship it back to them. Of course, there is a bit of an expense to that, but having that record of the minutes can sometimes be helpful. The reality of it today is that most of the time, most of us have a digital record of the minutes to begin with, that we really don't need to do the microfilm, which is why we haven't done that in Central Florida Presbytery. But if you have old enough records and you don't have the ability to scan them so that you have a digital record of them, the Department of History can probably do that. And I think they probably scan them rather than microfilm them, but I haven't checked lately. Anyway, you just have to make sure that you have preserved your minutes. In my last congregation, we had a fireproof safe that we kept the minutes in, so that if anything unfortunate happened at the church, we increased the likelihood that that record would survive. And that's an important thing to always be thinking about, that you have a way to secure your records so that if something unfortunate happens, you're giving as good of a chance of those records of surviving that you can. I need to pick up the pace a little bit here. So anyway, if you go to this website, history.pcusa.org, you'll find a lot of information from the Historical Society, including resources on preserving records, how long you need to retain certain records, like 7 years for financial records and so forth, and how long other things need to be kept. If you ever have any questions, they'll have information under congregations that tell you how long you need to retain certain records. All right, so the rolls and registers that you're keeping. There's 3 membership rolls: active, baptized, and affiliate. Chapter 3 of the form of government requires that. Actually, yeah, that's chapter 3. No longer do we require a list of inactive members. When I was on the committee that revised the Book of Order 12 years ago, and we just believed that the term inactive member was a contradiction in terms. If you're a member, the expectation is you'll be active. If you're not active, then you're really not a member. That being said, when you move somebody off the membership, active membership role because they're not attending church frequently, it's okay to keep a list of those people, somewhere in the session's record that you can refer to. For me, it's a lot better than just moving them to nothing. The presbytery will never ask to see your list of inactive people. They'll only want to see your active members roll, your baptized members roll, and your affiliate members roll if you have any. The registers that you're keeping are baptisms, ruling elders that have been ordained and elected, installed, deacons if you're using deacons, pastors that have served the congregation as installed pastors with the dates of their service. Again, this is out of the chapter 3.0204. Other registered as deemed necessary by the session, weddings conducted, funerals that have taken place, things like that. If you buy the post binder that has rolls and records from the denomination, it usually has divider tabs and pages for all of the rolls and registers that the session needs to keep. Some groups keep theirs using a program like Servant Keeper or some other database. Once again, it's a good idea to print out your records every year and put them in a safe place. Obviously, you're making backups of the digital information, but having an annual printout is necessary as well. About baptisms, just something very quick here. Whenever you have a baptism, the people being baptized, if they're, say, a parent's bringing their infant to be baptized, the minutes should record that the parents have actually met with the session and that counsel was given to the people being baptized. Usually I did this by meeting with the couple prior to the session meeting. That the session has taken an action to authorize the baptism. And in that action recorded in the minutes, you need the name of the person being baptized, the date of birth and the location where the person was born, the date of the baptism, the parent's name, including the mother's maiden name if it's an infant baptism, for record keeping's sake. You'd be surprised how frequently people will call up a church and say, I need to verify my baptism. And if you don't have this in the record book, you're going to have to refer to the session minutes. And again, hopefully this always appears in the same place, like under the pastor's report. But when I was in my last presbytery, I was chair of the session review committee that reviewed the session minutes. I chaired that committee for 5 years. And I would be reading minutes and I would see in the pastor's report that he had performed a baptism in a certain Sunday over the past month. And nowhere in the session minutes was there any information about the session ever taking any action to approve this baptism. Sometimes there wouldn't even be a name of the person baptized. And so I would write up the report of the presbytery to the session, encouraging them to track, the book of order requires you to counsel with the people being baptized. The session needs to approve the baptism ahead of time. Usually what we would do is we would have a special meeting of the session on Sunday morning right before the worship service. And usually at the previous month's session meeting, the session knew that the parents would be coming to present their child for baptism. They'd already heard from me that I had met with them according to our baptism policy and given counsel and so forth. So I mention this specifically just so that our churches are tightening up the way they do this to make sure that approvals are given and appropriate records are kept. All right. And then after the baptism is done, that should be recorded as well. A few things about meetings. Again, you're assisting the moderator in preparing the agenda for the meetings. As I mentioned before, you want to track unfinished business so that it doesn't fall between the cracks. And you need to notify groups when they need to appear before the session or to remind them that they need to report on unfinished business. Whatever notification needs to be given. You're tracking any referrals that are made to committees or worship teams or whatever teams you're using in your church. And you're assisting the moderator with matters of procedure. One of the handouts I gave you is about parliamentary procedure, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit. Something that's always helpful to give a reminder about, since the new form of government became effective in 2011, the session has a right to set its own quorum, as does the congregation. They have the right to determine how long reasonable notice needs to be in order to call a meeting. It used to be a quorum for a congregation was 10% of its active membership, and reasonable notice was 2 successive Sundays. Quorum for the session used to be 1/3 of the elders, but you can set your quorums and your reasonable notice to be whatever is effective for your congregation. If you have never taken that action, you're entitled to use the previous quorums of 1/3 of the elders and 10% of the active members. The Book of Order says that all sessions should have a manual of operations and bylaws. In the handouts that I've given you is some suggestions about how to structure a manual of operations and a sample set of bylaws if you don't have bylaws, or if your bylaws have gotten rather old and you need to update them. If you ever have any questions about a manual of operation or bylaws, please contact my office and we'll give you whatever assistance you need in getting these important documents up in proper shape. One of the things that we kept in my last church, last couple of churches, in the manual of operations, if the session ever adopted a policy or took an action that essentially became a policy, we tracked them in the manual as well. The Book of Order requires all sessions to have the following policies: sexual misconduct, a child, youth, and protection policy, and most likely coming at the next General Assembly is an anti-racism policy. The first two are already in G 3.0106. The third one is in a recommendation that is already before the General Assembly, but because of the choices they made was not acted on at the last assembly. The Presbytery has already begun working on its anti-racism policy. Another policy you need to have is a personnel policies. You ought to have a procedure for how you're handling personnel matters, how you're conducting performance reviews, what your defined holidays are, how many personal days people get and how they accumulate those. All of that stuff, position descriptions, they all should be spelled out in the personnel policies of the session. Questions about that? I'm beginning to start making, it's like you're drinking out of a fire hose at this point. A few things about parliamentary procedure. Think of parliamentary procedure as a staircase that you're going up and coming back down. The first step is the main motion that's going to be before the session. And a lot of things can happen to that. Like somebody could make a motion to amend. You've jumped up to the third step then. Another could say, let's refer this back to the worship committee. So now you're on the fourth step. And still the next person can say, let's postpone this to the next meeting. Now you're up one more step. You have to handle each of these motions made and touch this next step coming down in order to finally determine a motion. Let's say somebody moved to postpone it to a certain time, that's defeated, but the motion to refer it to committee passed, so it goes to that committee. But say the motion to refer it didn't pass and the amendment passed, and then the main motion passed, you're just touching the steps going down that you touched on the way up. When you get up to where it says lay on the table, everything from lay on the table up is not debatable. Everything from previous question down is debatable with certain limits. So the motion to adjourn, for instance, is not debatable. The thing that I sometimes like to say is that a motion to adjourn can be made at any time and it's always in order. Of course, you don't want to make it too early, because if people are invested in getting the work done, they're not going to want to handle that. So anyway, I have a couple of pet peeves I think I want to talk about parliamentary procedure. One is you'll be in a meeting and somebody will call out, I call the question. If you're moderating a meeting, you should ignore that. Because in order to call the question, a person has to get the floor. They have to be recognized by the moderator. If they're recognized by the moderator, then they can say, I move the previous question. And if that motion is seconded, then the moderator puts it to a vote. It's not debatable. He asks, are you ready for the previous question? If that passes, then the next thing the moderator does is put the question that's currently on the floor before the session and calls for the vote with no more debate. What moving the previous question does is it cuts off debate and calls for the body to immediately take a vote. So keep that in mind. It always has to happen after the person has been given the floor by the moderator. It must be seconded and then voted upon. The next pet peeve I have is the way that the motion to table gets used. And essentially, the motion to table is only supposed to be used if you're in the middle of business and something urgent has come up that needs immediate attention. You table the business that's currently on the floor so you can handle the urgent business. When the urgent business is handled, you return to the motion that has been tabled. You cannot table something from one meeting to the next meeting. The way you do that is you move to postpone something. Now, the important difference here is that the motion to table is not debatable, but the motion to postpone is. So it gives the body the opportunity to discuss whether it really wants to postpone something. The way that the motion to table gets misused, and I blame local government for this most frequently, is somebody will make the motion to table something because they know they have the votes to sustain that. And so they use it in a way to make some business go away, knowing that they'll never have the votes to get the motion off the table to be considered again. That is an abuse of power. It's not the way the motion is intended to be used. So if you ever hear somebody saying, I move we table this, you need to say your motion actually is to postpone it to the next meeting or to postpone it indefinitely. There are two different versions of this. And if that's the case, then the session can determine whether they want to postpone it or not, and then move on. All right, rules of debate very quickly. In order to have something debated, it has to be germane. Anything that somebody says has to be on point. They can't start talking about other things. It's not good form to personally attack anybody when you're debating, as we oftentimes see happening in Washington, D.C. Debate should be directed to the moderator and not directly towards another member. I say avoid ancient history. You need to stop bringing up, like when I first was in my first congregation, they had a very contentious issue over what to do with the cemetery wall that was deteriorating. And they had made a decision on what to do like 8 years before I came. And this kept coming up in debate. Well, I don't want us making a mistake like we did with the cemetery wall. Well, you think it's a mistake, but other people thought it wasn't a mistake. But the whole point is we're not going to bring this up. We're not going to refight that battle in order to make this decision. So try to avoid that if you can. You should not speak against your own motion. If you made a motion, it's usually considered poor form to speak against it. However, you can, at the end of the day, vote against your own motion. That's permissible. Permission is needed to read from books or papers. Somebody can't just open a book and start reading from it. They need the permission of the body to do that. And you need to refrain from disturbing the assembly. That means no side conversations, being on your phone or things like that during that time. Usually the moderator does not participate in debate in ways other than to try and clarify what's being said. In other words, the moderator does not argue for or against something and only expresses his or her opinion if the body asks for it. All right, voting is usually done by voice and oftentimes done by common consent. If there's a question about what the vote is, and we're getting like a 5-minute warning here. You can have a raising of hands or have people stand. Roberts calls for a rising vote at that point. And usually you just raise hands and the moderator decides which one is greater. That's in a large meeting. In a session meeting of 9 people, you just quickly count. A roll call if necessary. And again, that's usually larger meetings, and the General Assembly effectively takes votes by roll call when they do it electronically. It takes a simple majority of those voting, meaning half of the members plus 1, Or there are times when certain votes call for a higher level of vote, like 2/3 or 3/4, but those are usually specified. And should you abstain from voting? Well, Robert says the only reasons for abstaining is if you have a personal or pecuniary interest in the matter. In other words, you have a personal interest in it. Maybe the group that is going to provide a service is related to you, or a pecuniary interest. You would stand to gain money from the way the vote comes out. So an inability to make up your mind is not a sufficient reason to abstain. It's just not voting. You can choose not to vote, and that's what the inability to decide comes out to. Basically, in the area of communications, that's second of the three areas. Councils, again, communicate with sessions through the clerk and oftentimes as well through the moderator. The Presbytery will send notice about its meetings and the packet of materials. Usually you download those from the Presbytery website. We send out newsletters and email blasts, which may be of interest to individuals or committees within your church. There's the requirement to file annual reports, which everybody recently finished. The deadline for that was about 2 weeks ago. And any changes annually to terms of call, even if no changes were made, you annually report to the Presbytery the terms of call of your pastor. Those are just some of the examples of communications that are taking place.
Dan,
Right,
can I ask a
statistical
question?
reports? Yes.
On that previous screen,
Yeah,
when you were saying that, can you flip it back?
trying to.
Oh, okay. When you were saying that, I think it was that session reports to council, or council's report to session. I know the word council and sessions kind of used interchangeably. What do you mean when you're saying council and when you're saying session?
Council can mean, it could also be a presbytery or a synod or a general assembly. There are 4 councils in the church.
Gotcha. Okay.
Session is the basic council. The presbytery is the next level up.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right, sorry, I couldn't make it go back.
Oh, no, that's fine. I remembered.
All right. So anyway, annual reports. As clerk, you're supposed to make sure these are done. That doesn't necessarily mean you do them yourself. Oftentimes you need the assistance of the pastor and maybe the treasurer, among others. Sometimes the church educator helps you out with the Sunday school attendance and so forth. There used to be something called a clerk's questionnaire. I'm not sure whether they're still doing this or not. If it is, you'll get a notice from our office that the window to do this questionnaire is open from now until whenever it closes down. And this is something that you don't need session approval for. The annual statistical report should be reported to the session annually and included in the minutes book. But all the other reports don't have to be included in the book, including there's a number of reports that the Presbytery asks you to complete. Those don't have to be included in the book as well. So as I just said, you report the statistical report to the session and you spread it on the minutes. A lot of those Presbytery reports that we want from you, they're now done as Google Docs where you can fill them out and submit them when you're done electronically. So questions?
What do you mean by spread on the minutes? Does that just mean the full report gets in the minutes?
Yeah,
or-
usually what I would do when you do your annual report, you can print it out from the website. There's a website that you complete the reports on. And you can print that report out on a sheet of paper. You just attach that to your your minutes for that
Right.
meeting. If you'll look at, eventually, probably on Monday, the addendum reports for next Saturday's meeting will be released. And a couple of reports in my report is it's the summary Presbytery report of all the statistical reports, talking about membership gains and losses and number of people in Sunday school and finances and so forth. I have that in my report, and I have a breakdown of the membership report by congregation. And what that leads to is knowing what the membership of our congregations are. gives us information as to how many commissioners they're entitled to send to Presbytery meetings. And it also gives information for what per capita is going to be in, the membership that you reported at the end of 2021 is used to calculate the per capita that is paid in 2023. It's always that lag. Last year's membership informs next year's per capita. Other questions? One of the things I haven't said, but if you ever have any questions about any procedure, anything that comes up in a meeting that you have questions about, anything about keeping minutes or keeping rolls and registers, give me a call or give Christina Greenewald a call. Both of us are available to assist you. To kind of paraphrase that prime directive, our number one responsibility is to make the Presbytery moderator look good. Our number two responsibility is to help make sure that our session clerks look good. We exist to help you get your job done and to help you know what it is you're supposed to do and help you navigate your way through questions that you have.
Dan,
Yes.
I had a question.
Sure.
When you were talking about the Presbyterian Historical Society, is it possible to get a copy of that screen? Because you said that they also had information about, because I know we have all the minutes at the church now, I think since day one, because I actually, when I was the clerk last time, I actually went back and saw my baptism, inside the book. That was kind of cool. So we do have fire safe cabinets now that we keep them in. But is there some period of where we should be sending it into the Historical Society, or are we okay with the fire safe?
You're okay with the fire safe vault but
cabinets? Yeah.
if you want to take it one step further, you can always involve the Presbyterian Historical Society. Now, I don't know what you're seeing on your screen right now.
There's us.
4 of us.
Just
Okay, you just seen me, so apparently I can't share my screen anymore. I'll try.
Are you able to send us the PowerPoint that you shared with us today?
One that I just did, yes.
That would be great.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
It was a good presentation, by the way.
Yes, it was.
Are you seeing my browser now that says Presbyterian Historical
yeah.
Society?
Yep.
If you just search Presbyterian Historical Society, it should be the first thing that comes up. But this is what their site looks like. And you see, where do I want to look here? I'm having trouble with my window of you all getting in the way.
I have a question, but this has to do with minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's 2 questions. One is, when the committees give their report, they may give the report was like 2 months previous and there's new stuff, so that they add that in conversation. Do I make note of those new items that happened since their report? Yeah, I don't know how much to add. Because their reports are pretty complete, but then there's newer things that have happened since. And then there's always one committee who never writes a report, and their only report is to session, and you end up writing their darn report.
Yeah, that makes it tough when you
Terrible.
have to give an oral report and you're basically listening and trying to discern what needs to go in the minutes and what doesn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's why it's so helpful to have the to have things in writing. That way, it makes it so much easier on the clerk.
But the new things that were not in their in their written report, do you usually add those in? I mean, I have been, but I've only done this twice. So
I tend to do that. Again, I gave you the rule of thumb that minutes are a record of what was done, not necessarily what was said, but again, you have to enter some stuff in there because you're also creating a historical record.
Yeah,
So like I usually list what the plenary speaker was and what the topic was, that sort of thing. But if it's a report that has been given before and they've added some additional things, I make a decision as whether those additional items need to be included in the minutes or not.
okay. Well,
Like maybe the additional report is, we had our, our choir concert 2 weeks ago and 136 people were in attendance. I'll probably decide to put that in as a, a historical factoid that may be important at some point in time.
Yeah, okay. I just,
So-
I did my minutes. It took me 5 hours to do each one. And, one was a congregational meeting. Of course, you have to take those minutes. And the other one was a regular session meeting. But, when I turned them over to the minister, he said, there's too much information in here. I'm like, I don't know what to leave out.
Yeah, I ran into that the first time when I was a clerk.
Yeah,
My minutes were, they were long. I literally recorded everything and I was told that was too much. That all you need to do is just the motions. But then
Right.
that was too little.
Yeah, there's
That's-
too little there.
yeah, you just, all I can say is as you get more experience with all of this, you'll probably get a better sense of what needs to go in and what doesn't.
Okay.
And if not, when they review their minutes, maybe the session will help you along by saying, that's probably more information than what needs to be in there.
Right.
But usually my experience is most sessions go with what their clerk does. And they'll only point out if there's a glaring omission of something.
Well, that's another question. When they have something they want to correct, do you report that in your minutes? What they correct, like
I
spelling?
usually just say, okay, I keep I make a list of any changes that need to be done, but usually what I have is I have the minutes up on my computer and I actually make the corrections on the minutes as they're being suggested. And what I put in the current minutes is the minutes of the previous meeting were approved with corrections, and that's all I say. Or were approved as presented. And I don't say in the wording, I don't say the previous meeting, I actually put the date. The minutes of the March 5th, 2022 Presbytery meeting were approved as presented or whatever. So,
Okay, so you,
yeah,
So-
I don't think it really helps a lot to make a list of all of the things people are saying. You just
Right.
make sure that the corrections are made in the official minutes of that go in the book.
Right, okay,
So
that works.
a little bit ago, I said I thought we got the 5-minute warning. I just got the 5-minute warning about 45 seconds ago.
Yeah, I think they gave us some more time, like 15 minutes.
Yeah, because it's 10:25 right now, and I thought this was go to like 10:15.
Right.
So any other questions?
Gosh,
It's clear as mud, right?
yeah.
A lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My usual joke is I ask people after they said that, they were elected clerk, I said, well, were you absent from the meeting where they took the vote? And I figured that's how people get elected as clerk. So,
Right.
Yeah, because we also end up doing the resolutions. Is that something, at least I know at my church, the clerk
Yeah.
does the resolutions as well when someone passes.
oh, you mean like a memorial minute or something like that?
Yeah, like at the funeral, you know how you have the church resolution that they
Okay,
read?
yeah.
That's on the clerk to write. At least at our church, the clerk is responsible for that as well.
We haven't been doing that as much at the presbytery level, but sometimes you would have somebody during new business, they would get up and read something into the record of a former minister who had just passed away,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. Yeah. I remember when I was really young and going to a congregational meeting, the clerk of session would always have a prominent role in the meeting, usually reading the previous minutes and so forth. And I was always sitting back there in the congregation in awe of this person. wow, the clerk of session, this person, wow, Then I became the clerk of my presbytery. And about a year and a half after I started serving as stated clerk of a presbytery, the church that I grew up in elected my mother to be the clerk of session. I think they figured it must run in the family and they were hoping it ran backwards. But she served as the clerk of her session for probably, I forget, 9 or 12 years, something like that.
Wow. And
She was a school librarian, so she was cut out well to be
oh,
a
yeah,
records keeper.
yeah. My mother was a librarian.
Yeah.
A question again.
Yeah.
So I know we keep the minutes. So should we also be retaining like copies of the docket?
We always do. We put it in a file, but you don't have to keep those more than a year.
Oh, no more than a year. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of those documents that you only have to keep for a year. We had a filing system in my last church, and essentially there were a couple of file drawers that existed for the current year's session work. And so it would have like files of things that went to the session. It would have files for each of the committees. And then there was files for financial records. And every year we would move down things from the current year to the previous year. And what was in the previous year drawers went into a banker's box. And particularly the things that went in the banker's box were the financial records. And those then were kept in storage. And the box that was 8 years old got discarded, since we were required to keep financial records for 7 years. So we always had the current years in a file cabinet. Then one of the bottom drawers had the previous years in case we needed to refer to stuff there. And then everything as the previous year became the third year down, they went into banker's boxes. So every year when we moved files around, we were always throwing one set of records out. But certain records like agendas and things like that, we didn't keep more than a year, especially since I had all of those on my computer if we ever needed them.
Mm-hmm.
But the agenda is it's just an agreement as to the order that the session's going to handle business. And when you have the minutes of the meeting, you've basically got the order of what the session did. You don't need the agenda any longer. But again, like I said, we kept papers like that for a year. The danger you run into is Presbyterian churches can become functional pack rats, and they're keeping way too much stuff.
Yep.
And you're just overwhelmed by his paper monster. So
yeah, we have that going on now in our finance room.
well, I'm surprised.
I don't even like to walk in there, just boxes.
I'm surprised we're not getting this meeting is ending warning here. None of you have seen that, right?
Mm-mm.
Any other questions?
Don't have any.
Let's see if I can.
Thank
stop
you.
recording.
Thank you for all of that. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Sure, and like I said again, anytime you need any assistance, just
Right.
let
And
us know.
a copy of that thing you spoke about in the very beginning about minutes, something you wrote,
Taking minutes, yes.
minutes. I'd like to get that.
Let me see. Cheryl Carson sent out something this morning to all of you,
It's a
and
two-page.
it does have taking minutes on it. So she sent an email out about 8:11, it looks like, this morning, and it went to it looks
Got
like
it.
all 4 of you are on that.
I got the one that had all the appendices,
The attachments.
attachments, appendix N. There's Clerk of Session, parliamentary procedure
Yeah. Well, the taking minutes one,
was on a different email.
it was on the email that went out this morning.
Yeah, it's in there. It's a two-page
It
document.
looks like this. It says Appendix P on it, taking minutes.
Mhm.
Well, this isn't what I wanted to show you.
No, it's in there.
Yeah, so it looks like, if you can see my screen, are you seeing the one that says taking minutes?
It doesn't say taking minutes, but that's my,
But that is it.
It's called a suggestion for session minutes.
that's it. I have that then.
Yeah, that's the one I meant.
That's it.
Because if you go down to the very bottom of this, it's going to say my name, I think, along with John Goodman.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So-
Got it. Then
So
I do,
again, this a such session for taking minutes. You don't have to have each and every paragraph that this talks about in your minutes. You just need to include what you need to include. But it gives you an idea of how to keep it.
no, that's good.
Okay.
I'll thoroughly read that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, I do have been taking, well, just once, I took a little recorder with me. Do you, I told the moderator I had it and I had it in front of me. Do you need to announce the entire body that you're recording?
I would say that to everybody. If you look at our Presbytery packet, the very front cover sheet is going to say somewhere on it that the meeting is being recorded for the accuracy of keeping the minutes.
Okay.
In Florida, you are not allowed to record somebody without their consent or without their knowledge. So it's always a good idea to say, we're recording this meeting just to help us as a backup for keeping the minutes.
Right.
I've got the window now. You probably do too, about leaving the breakout room.
Breakout room, yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for your time, for giving attention to my spiel. And I hope you have lots of success in your service as a clerk.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
presentation, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you
Sure.
all. Just click on leave and we'll go back to the main meeting.
Okay.
I will send her your email, your contact information. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Christina, do you have what I signed up, I think, for Reformed Theology?
Yeah, we're gonna do the same one. We're gonna self-select, but yes, I have to rebuild those in the break time that we'll have. And then we'll go through the same process we did for the first time.
Perfect. You've got us under control, don't you?
I
Thank
try.
you.
You did get my message, Christina, about the alternate Scott Zinn.
Yes, I did see that.
Okay.
I was a little confused. I was like, is that for the first time?
No,
But okay, so that
I
makes a
said
lot
to-
more sense now.
To be, yeah.
Because I was like, those are all B1 second sessions. Okay.
Christina, you're doing a great job.
That's recording. Can you stop the recording on this one?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know.
When do we need to be back?
Cheryl, do you want to, someone is recording who was a presenter. Could you stop your recording?
I've tried and it's not letting me.
Yeah, the button that I had for starting a recording disappeared during the time.
I don't know why it's not stopping.